The hospital's east wing still smelled like smoke that morning, though the fire had been put out hours before a gas line ruptured in the emergency department. Director Marcus Webb stood in the wreckage of what had been Triage Bay 4, staring at scorched gurneys and shattered glass, trying to make sense of the impossible number his staff kept repeating to him. 57, he said again, as if saying it twice might change the answer. 57 patients moved out of a collapsing wing in under 20 minutes. That's not possible with the staff we had on shift. The charge nurse beside him, still in soot-streaked scrubs, wouldn't meet his eyes at first. It wasn't the staff on shift, sir, she said. It was Nurse Ellison. Webb felt his jaw tighten. Grace Ellison is suspended. She's not supposed to be anywhere near this building. I suspended her myself 3 days ago. I know, the nurse said quietly. She came anyway. Grace Ellison had spent 11 years on that trauma floor. Long enough to know every hallway by instinct, every patient's chart by heart, every doctor's habit well enough to predict their next move before they made it. She had also spent 11 years watching hospital budgets shrink while patient loads grew, watching corners get cut in ways that never made the news but sometimes cost lives in the quiet hours between shift changes. 3 weeks earlier, she had refused a direct order to discharge an elderly patient before he was stable, insisting he needed another day of monitoring. The attending physician, annoyed and overruled in front of colleagues, had reported her for insubordination. The hospital board, eager to avoid a lawsuit from the doctor's side rather than risk one from a patient's family, suspended her pending review. She wasn't supposed to set foot in the hospital again until that review concluded. But she had a police scanner in her kitchen out of old habit, and when she heard the call about a gas leak at County General, she didn't think about her suspension. She thought about the ventilator patients in the ICU who couldn't move themselves, about the new nurses on nights who had never run a mass evacuation drill for real, about the elderly man in Bay 4 she had refused to discharge, still recovering, still there. She arrived in street clothes, no badge, no authorization, and walked straight into the chaos like she had never left. The security guard at the door, who had worked with her for 6 years, didn't ask a single question. He just opened the door wider. Inside, panic had already begun to spread the way it always does when smoke fills hallways designed for healing, not escape. New nurses stood frozen, waiting for someone to tell them what to do, because nothing in their training had prepared them for evacuating patients hooked to machines, while breathing through the sting of gas fumes. Grace didn't wait to be asked. She started calling out names, assignments, directions, the same calm authority she'd used for over a decade, except now there was no ID badge to back it up, only the certainty in her voice. She personally carried the elderly man from Bay 4 out on a gurney, one hand steadying his oxygen line, murmuring reassurances the entire way, though her own eyes stung and watered from the smoke thickening around them. She organized triage in the parking lot with cardboard signs and borrowed blankets, assigning colors to patients based on severity the way she'd learned in disaster training years ago. Training most of the newer staff had never actually practiced under real pressure. She sent runners for oxygen tanks. She held a dying man's hand for 4 minutes because there was nothing left to do for him but that, and she refused to let him leave the world with a stranger's hand instead of a familiar one. By the time the fire department declared the building stable enough for re-entry, every single patient from the East Wing had been accounted for, stabilized, and safely relocated. 57 souls saved not by hospital policy or emergency protocol, but by a woman with no ID badge and no legal right to be there at all. Marcus Webb found her 3 hours later, sitting on the curb outside the ambulance bay, her clothes stained with soot and someone else's blood, her hands still trembling from adrenaline finally draining out of her body. He sat down beside her without a word for a long moment, staring at the wreckage of the wing. She had emptied with nothing but her own 2 hands and a refusal to accept that rules mattered more than lives. "You could lose your license for this," he finally said. "Coming in while suspended? Working without authorization?" Grace looked at him, exhausted but unashamed. "I could have lost my soul for staying home," she said. "I'll take the license." Webb was quiet for a long time, watching the sun rise over the parking lot full of patients wrapped in blankets, alive because one suspended nurse had refused to stay away. Then he stood, extended his hand to help her up, and said the only thing that felt true. "Effective immediately," he said. "Your suspension is over. And somebody in this hospital is finally going to start listening to you."